welcome back to the Simpleton podcast. I've been corrected. We do not have banjo music on this podcast. It is merely guitar. All right, we got 4 things we want to cover today. Well, first, let me say hello to my longtime friend, Laura Heeman.
Hello, longtime friend, Clark Massey.
Good to see you again.
You too.
All right, we got 4 things to talk about today. There's a little concern with classical education raised by my 6-year-old. We're going to discuss. We're also going to talk about the use of rhetoric and Fox 2 working for you, like weird ideas when the lie outcompetes the truth. Another thing we want to talk about is transhumanism movement. Has it happened? Is it good? What's the future of that? And finally, I'm going to give a special class for all you men out there who are married. It's going to be a class on trolling your wife. So stay tuned for that at the end of the podcast.
Also called a class on how to sleep on the couch.
It doesn't work that way.
No?
It just adds a little bit of spice when you troll your wife.
I've never heard these trolls, so we'll see.
Yeah, Laura's going into that segment blind, so you'll get her authentic reactions.
Yeah.
All right, classical ed. So I'm sitting in the car, and my kids have been listening to the CD History of the World, right? And I don't even remember the exact name of it, and I kind of don't want to bash it publicly, so I don't want to tell you the exact name of it, but it's a popular set of CDs about the history of the world. And I've already had some problems with it because it's had a couple factual errors where they'll report like something that's kind of a legend, like it's fact. And they'll also do something where they'll put people like in historical situations where we don't know what they said or did. Like we don't know what their last words were, and they'll just like act it all out. And to the kid, it really sounds like that's what happened.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's one possibility of what happened.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's got a little bit of a historical fiction bent in it. It's probably giving the popular classical interpretation of history. Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm sitting in the car.
I think like very few people have a sort of natural grasp of like an overview of history, right? So something like that would be positive.
Oh, yeah. It's very good for just getting a timeline set up to place your ideas on. Here's something that to be concerned with, that we aren't blindly classical. Like we are pro-classical ed, but not blindly so. My 6-year-old sitting in the back of the car. He's a very cute kid, very innocent kid. And he goes, "Hey, Dad." I go, "What?" He goes, "One time the Romans like started a city and they had no women. So they like waited for a festival and then they like kidnapped all these women and then they were good." So my kid...
Did he see this as creative problem solving?
Yes. It was just like, and that's kind of the way that story's told. So basically he's telling me the story of the rape of the Sabine women. Right? And I'm like, why is my 6-year-old worried about this? Or like in the rape of the Sabine women, you have to think there's an aspect of kidnapping. Mm-hmm. There's an aspect of Stockholm syndrome. And there's an aspect of rape.
Yeah.
And it's even hard for an adult to process.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that with all things that have endured, like there's also this same story in the end of the book of Judges that the tribe of Benjamin has been fighting with the other tribes of Israel almost to extinction, and all the women are gone and there's only so many men left. And all the remaining tribes vowed that they would not give any of their daughters in marriage to this tribe. Like that was one of the vows they made when they went to fight. And so now they're like, oh no, did we just like
kill
genocide?
Ourselves off?
Yeah. We just kill a whole tribe of Israel. Was that really worth it? And so then they have to figure out how they get these guys wives, and they end up like making a deal that they'll kidnap wives out of a festival way more than the Romans, like 10 times more.
Yeah.
About 200, I think. And they carry off their wives, and then when the dads and brothers come, they're like, "Dude, we made a vow we wouldn't give these wives. You're excused from the vow because this was not done by your choice, and please let them keep these wives," right? Mm-hmm. Once again, in a lot of reading the Old Testament, something people need to keep in mind is many of these stories, particularly at the last part of the book of Judges, is one of the weirdest parts of the Bible. It doesn't say God told them to. Yeah. It doesn't say it's good. I almost feel like the last chapters of the book of Judges are just saying things are really messed up when you don't have a king, and that's why they got a king in the next book.
Yeah.
So you don't really need to worry about endorsing this or not, but it's a very like heavy story.
Yeah.
Now, what's funny about American culture is we made it into a musical. 7 brides for 7 brothers, of which 6 were abducted brides. Okay.
This is, I feel the few people our age that have seen and younger that have seen this movie have like a love. They either love or hate this movie.
Well, I feel like when I saw it as a kid, once again, like, why was I watching this? Because it's like, it's such a heavy subject, but it's being done as a musical, right?
Yeah.
Basically, they kidnap their brides at a festival.
Yeah.
And then they cause an avalanche in the past so that the dads and brothers can't go rescue their sisters and daughters. And then all winter, these brides are held captive and slowly develop Stockholm syndrome and marry the 7 brothers. This is, by the way, this is not an obscure movie. This is like in the national like heritage archive of movies. This is considered one of the better movies of all time. It's a very attractive movie, but it's like how did this not get canceled? Yeah. I don't think Laura and I are trying to cancel it, but this is just not something that's fit for 6-year-olds. Like this is a heavier topic.
Yeah.
So when you do your classical education, make sure you leave out the rape of the Sabian women until they're at least about 20 would be my suggestion. And then deal with it delicately. Okay. Do you have any other input on this, Laura? No,
I wonder if anyone, I don't have a good defense for including the rape of the Sabian women in a classical education, but okay. I wonder if someone does. Yes. Anyway, it does remind me, though, of an argument that you and I have had, like, should you try to kind of give your kids the Bible in a more accessible form? Right. And you came down hard on the no side.
I come down hard on the no. I also, though, don't know that you want your kids reading every story in the Old Testament, and I think that's kind of a historically justified point of view that I think a lot of the saints were like, this should be read as you get older, or more spiritually mature, not from the outset. I've actually know someone who was in a crisis in life and started reading the Bible from page 1, which I think is a terrible idea. Yeah. I do think page 1 may be the most important page of the Bible, but it's just you're not going to find the answer to life going in cold on page 1. Yeah. And like by the time, I think the person might have been struggling with fertility or something. And by the time the person got to the story of Abraham and Sarah and their struggle with fertility, the person was like throwing the book out the window. Like, what the heck am I supposed to do? Get him a concubine? Yeah. And it's like, it's not necessarily a faith-giving book. Yeah. I think giving away New Testaments is the answer to that. Yeah. I think reading just a short gospel like Mark is the way to introduce people to the Bible. Yeah. And it's a dangerous book. I mean, it's a book that can have you leave everything. Yeah. So I like it. I mean, I'm not trying to get the danger out of it, but it's much more speaking to people where they're at. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of think of the Old Testament as like a book about the human condition, Right. And generally try to shield our kids from that in other ways. Right. But yeah. Right. What was an interesting observation at our book club recently is we were reading St. Thomas More's Utopia, and a lot of what he's talking about is just not that radical. Yeah. But if you think about it in historical context of having nobles, and how flat that society was, and there wasn't much of a nobility, it's like very radical for that time. Yeah. Right? And then the comparisons made to Jesus's words. Jesus's words were incredibly radical in the year, 30, and they're incredibly radical right now. Yeah. It's like there's nothing where you have to like go put yourself in that age to figure out why they were revolutionary words. Yeah. Like they are revolutionary in every age, which is interesting. Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah. All right. Now we're going to go on to our next topic, which has to do with rhetoric. So I met a PhD in rhetoric. Shout out to Dr. Corin of teaching at Rockhurst High School here in Kansas City. She's a PhD from CUA and had studied rhetoric. I didn't know people still got PhDs in that. Yeah, I didn't either. All right. Well, we found this awesome piece of rhetoric. Might rub you the wrong way. It's called Fox 2 Working for You. It's on YouTube, and we'll let Ben insert a clip that kind of gives you a taste of what this is about. I definitely suggest everyone see it in its entirety. You will either be horrified or find it hilarious.
She recently did a story about a woman who bought a house in Detroit and wanted to sell it. But a squatter had taken over the house and refused to leave.
May I have the keys?
months. Maybe think I'm gonna go move in. Can I get in?
No, sir.
But I have the deed here. Here's the deed, and I got permission from the landlord.
Okay, I'm not the only one that is squatting. It's a lot of other people on the block.
But she wants her place back.
Yeah, but I had put a lot of work in here.
I don't think you're gonna get away with this.
I mean, I'm probably not. I'm going to jail for squatting. Call my boyfriend next up.
The summary of what you just saw is that someone left their house for a month on vacation or on a trip or something like that.
2 months. Yeah. Sorry.
2 months. All right. And while they were gone, someone moved into their house. So when they came back, their house had literally been stolen. Right?
Yeah.
Now, this squatter uses great rhetoric, and actually the homeowner was not able to get her house back until this guy comes, wears a bathrobe, brings a news crew, and tries to squat on the squatter. And through this like counter rhetoric, the woman actually gets her house back by the end of the show, right? Or by the end of the
owner,
clip. All
right.
The owner does.
All right. I found the video unpalatable the first time I watched it. Like, it made me kind of like cringe and feel, so this person is like playing everyone, right? And she's kind of trying to use the law to play everyone, and she's using these like kind of lame excuses to play everyone. And so this guy comes and just like plays her right back, you know? And it's like that. I think that's the thing that makes me uncomfortable is this. He's like kind of playing with this person's life, you know? Yeah.
I think this is wonderful, and I'm going to defend this. By the way, if you spend time at Simple House or even in a government agency serving the poor, you get in a lot of situations where just this is continuing a conversation we just had about insincere conversations, about bad faith conversations. You get someone who's actually not after the truth while you're talking to them.
Yeah.
Right. And what this guy's doing is he's like, instead of like assuming the best of the person and assuming they are after the truth, he's kind of giving them what they're giving them back what they're playing out, right? Playing the player, right?
Yeah.
And I have found this actually decently useful in ministry, where like when someone's kind of trying to play you, instead of just like assuming the best, you actually take their argument to ad infinitum or to ad absurdum. You just kind of play along and go, and then we'll do this and then this, until it's just like clear we're both idiots if we're going down this road, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you can do that, then I can do this too. It'll be great. You know, and he's doing this a little bit, and I think it's actually a way to get to truth, because it's kind of like, it does get to truth. It does return the house to the person.
Yeah.
Right? And this is something very common. Like when you meet a homeless person, they use rhetoric on you that makes you feel like you're a bad person. It's almost like you are now on trial if you do not give me this, you know, and they know how to paint you into a corner, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I've had this conversation with our missionaries before, is they'll be like, oh, but what if that is like, they're almost like, well, isn't that a mean assumption to think that they're not being honest, to think that they're in bad faith?
Yeah, I think it's like you might pick up on this person says they have to go get their child.
Like, for example, if you're dealing with an addict and they say, well, I have to do this first, or I have to do this. Well, they're almost always just making excuses. Yeah. Right. But if you take all their excuses very seriously, you actually hurt the whole process. Yeah. But the other thing you do is, if they're deliberately trying to play you, is you have a choice. Like in the case of this like squatter situation and in other situations that you come into when you work with people, is either I have to think you're an idiot and you believe what you're saying. Yeah. Or I have to assume you're not an idiot and that you're actually in bad faith.
Right, right.
So like,
so it's like, which is more offensive, right? They're like both offensive. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not a better Christian for thinking they're an idiot.
Yeah.
You know
what was an interesting thing in the video, though, is like it kind of starts off like jokey but antagonistic, you know, and she is, you know, very calm during the whole thing, weirdly calm, which I think also made me uncomfortable. But it's like slightly antagonistic at the beginning. And then somehow this reporter, who's still in the bathrobe and still same personality, is like, I don't know if this is going to work out for you. And Lynn is like, yeah, I don't either, you know? And it's like,
he said, I don't think you're going to get away with this.
Yeah,
do you?
yeah,
And she's like, I don't think so either.
Yeah. But it's like, all of a sudden it's like, there was something interesting about that it was like, it was antagonistic. And then it was like, she somehow felt like he wasn't totally against her, you know?
Well, no, I think you're reading that wrong. I think that when you let someone operate in bad faith with you, they think you're an idiot. And there's no real relationship possible there because you're the mark, right?
Yeah.
And there's a way in which he's playing the same game she's playing.
Yeah.
And she almost sees him as an equal by the end.
Yeah, right.
Whereas she doesn't see the system or the cops or anybody else who she can just like invent and get rid of as an equal.
Yeah, that was like exactly. The other thing that I thought was interesting is, according to Lynn, many of the neighbors are also squatters, you know, and it's like the police take Lynn away.
Right. I don't know. I kind of think that could have been a rhetorical device too. Like when you say everyone's doing it, I kind of wondered if that was just rhetoric too. But sorry, let's transition from this. One of the interesting ideas here that I think is an idea that I want to develop more generally is there are times where the truth loses. Mm-hmm. You know, like if you've got a marketplace of ideas and 10 theories are floating and one's going to win, one of them will be more true than the others. Mm-hmm. And the truth has advantages. Like it's more consistent with reality. It has less friction with reality. Yeah. It's attractive to truth seekers. Yeah. Right. But the truth doesn't always win in the marketplace of ideas. Yeah. And I want to be careful here that, like, I was in a discussion with my recovering nihilists, and you know who you are, my buddies. And whenever I would say that the truth doesn't always win and certain ideas are viral and negative, they would be like, well, then you're kind of giving up on the marketplace of ideas. And not at all. Right. Yeah. The marketplace of ideas can have a ton of problems, but it's way better than getting rid of free speech. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's true of the capitalism or decentralized economy versus central planned economy. It's like I can do a whole college course on problems with a decentralized economy, but at the end of that course, it doesn't mean that it's worse than a centralized economy, you know? And it's like, it's almost like comparing a plane that flies to a plane that doesn't fly. Right. I mean, like the marketplace of ideas produces so much better results than shutting down the marketplace of ideas that it's not really a comparison. Yeah. You know, but there are shortcomings. There are problems with the marketplace. So I'm thinking of the marketplace of ideas like certain ideas have just the way you could have different apps, and one app might be on ground level better than the others, but it doesn't have a viral element. It doesn't have a self-promotion aspect. It doesn't have an addictive element, maybe, right? Yeah. I think this is true of ideas too. I'll give my example that's on the front of my mind right now, because we're going to interview someone who is going to talk about the spiritual dimension of addiction through like the kind of the lens of a 12-step program. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's a big counter philosophy to 12-step programs called harm reduction. Yeah. This philosophy has been wholesale bought by like the certain cities have really bought into this philosophy.
And for dealing with like homeless, with drug addicts, in school districts, it's been bought. Right. Yeah.
It's primarily an addiction. It's an addiction question, though. It's not really a homeless question.
Right. But school counselors have to deal with drug addicts.
Exactly. 100%. Right. Mm-hmm. So the harm reduction model has bad fruit. Yeah. Like if you just look at the fruit, the money invested versus the return, it is not nearly as good as these 12-step programs. Yeah. And I think it's less true than the 12-step programs fundamentally. Yeah. But it wins. Mm-hmm. And why does it win? Well, so let me just summarize it real quick. So harm reduction's like sobriety is unrealistic. You can't really take an addict and ask them never to use again. What you really should do is have them tone down their using in certain ways that it hurts less people. Yeah. That's the idea.
Yeah. I think like with a younger, it's like you want this young person to trust you. You don't want to make them angry. You want them to come back to the counseling center. So we'll just advise them to tone it down. And then little by little, you know.
Right. And the 12-step program never takes money for it when it's done correctly and like an anonymous group. And it wants complete reform, you know.
Yeah.
And so it takes no resources. It wants complete reform.
Yeah. And it's like a rip the Band-Aid off. Like, it's like,
right.
you're going
to, you need to confront the truth of this problem. And when you meet people who've been through it and done well, like people who've really reformed through the 12-step program, they're often amazing people.
Yeah.
Like very, very amazing people. Like, like not a little bit better, but almost better than everyone else you know in some ways.
Yeah. And I think like both Ryan and I have felt like we've sort of benefited personally from like the 12-step program lessons when we've had like friends tell us about it, that they've, and I like been like, that is really deep insight that helps me.
We're not into defending all of it right now.
No.
I think the question is, why then would a different idea outcompete it? And one idea is that addicts like harm reduction better. That's pretty obvious.
They can keep using. Yeah.
The rhetoric around harm reduction is great rhetoric because you say you act like the 12-step program is unrealistic. You know, and to people who don't know a lot, that does sound that way. It sounds true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the third thing is it literally gets an industry built around it. Because you get people literally making the clean heroin to give to the drug addicts. So now you have a pharmaceutical company involved.
Yeah.
Right? And you have counseling agencies. And you have all these people who are literally building an industry around it.
Yeah.
And now you have a lobbying group. And the 12-step program has no lobbying group. So there are all these aspects to it that give it what I'm calling a virality or a power of that idea that aren't about truth.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's related to what we're getting ready to talk about next. Let's go to the transhumanism movement.
Oh, boy.
All right. I've got a definition of transhumanism, and then I'll let you kind of like explode it from there. Transhumanism is the movement to increase human lifespan and cognition through a more intimate melding with technology, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. So in a way, the transhumanism movement opens the door for cyborgs and mutants. Cyborgs meaning like part machine, part human, and mutants meaning like actually messing with biotechnology in your body. Yeah. And I think the first question is, has it already happened?
Elon Musk had like a famous insight about this. I think this was a few years ago, maybe. He was like kind of excited about some of the AI stuff they were doing, and somebody was like, well, do you think this is like good for the human race or whatever? And he's like, you're already doing it. Like, this is, phone in your hand. You don't think that's like an extension of you?
Well, let me give 3 examples. One is the smartphone. Another one is Blade Runner from South Africa, where they literally like amputate the guy's legs and he is faster as a result because he has spring legs. Right. And another example is online dating. Yeah. Using AI. So Blade Runner, enough said. I don't know what else to say about that. The online dating is interesting because when it uses, it's definitely a technological tool that is influencing human breeding, right? Yeah. And if you introduce a little bit of AI into it, like you have some matchmaking that's based on learning, computer learning, now all of a sudden you have AI running human breeding projects.
Which we do, like.
We do have that. Yeah, that's already here, so, right? Yeah. And online dating is very popular. Like, I don't know what fraction of the population uses it, but it's not small, right? Yeah, yeah. And then on top of that, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, and well, just as far as like kind of thinking about profiles, online representations of people, like I think a few years ago, I was worried about how to help kids see that like their online profile is like not reality, and other people's, and it's like that distinction gets blurrier to me every day, how to help a person see that, like a kid, their identity and their online identity are so tied together.
And that's kind of the old classic thing humans have always had a problem with, which is just like when you think your appearances are who you are, or the impression you give is who you are.
But I think it's just like the idea now, it's like you can so carefully craft and curate it and edit it,
right. It's like we've given people their own marketing departments.
Yeah. That's
besides the social networks, this smartphone by itself I've kind of dedicated myself to not memorize anything that I can look up quickly. You know, like I'll try to remember scripture, but I've never put any time into trying to memorize a telephone number anymore, you know, or an address.
I think that's always been like a thing that humans have had. So there's like a trade-off there, or there's a trade-off we may not understand or be able to anticipate.
Right. But you're saying there could be a negative in that trade-off. It also could be a great positive.
Right. Yeah.
And like, for example, like if you are helping people meet their match with these dating apps, is that in fact negative? Or are you actually helping Catholics with similar values get together, or whatever your, situation is,
whatever,
right?
Yeah.
Like, are we actually just adding an efficiency to the dating market?
Yeah.
You know, so at some level it's already here. Like we're not like walking around looking like cyborgs or part of the Borg from Star Trek, but we've already accepted a lot of these, modifications without a lot of protest.
Yeah, I mean, I think people wouldn't even, if you ask them what these modifications were, I don't think people think about them, right? It's not just that we've accepted, like we've sort of quietly, unknowingly accepted them, Right.
And one of the ideas that Elon Musk he was a big proponent against AI. He's also one of the biggest developers of AI. But he was one of the ones that we need something that will keep AI from destroying the world. He was like promoting this for years. And one of his thoughts, why he started his Neuralink company, or the stated reason why he starts his Neuralink company, is he thinks that humans have to have cognition helps to keep up so AI doesn't take over the world.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And his, the things I've heard him identify as like the problems he's trying to solve are, can you upload and download information quicker? Right. Like, is there a way that like we do this all the time.
Like you don't have to read an article or something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we have I think his main thing is he thinks the bottleneck is us expressing our ideas is very slow. Like us downloading the information is very slow. And so the idea with Neuralink is that somehow we would have a port to our brain that would create a communication to the brain in and out that would just be faster.
Yeah.
Right. And that this would help us from becoming obsolete to AI. Right. Another thing he talks about is how much your thoughts are controlled by your limbic system. Like how much do you use your conscious powers thinking about food, sex, and sleep? Right. And, I think a teenage boy knows that this is a huge problem, that like if you could somehow like decouple that, think of what you could get done.
Yeah.
So it's very unromantic, very kind of scary as an idea, but that's like where Elon's going with this. It's like, could we just think about sex a little bit less? And could we upload and download information faster?
Yeah. Are you stating these ideas or defending? Are you sympathetic to these ideas? Or?
Well, I think we have to admit it's not clear they're wrong. We have to figure out where our objection is here. And what would happen if we let this just go? Yeah. Because Catholics can cooperate with certain aspects of this. We're not like banning Catholics from using dating apps or something like that.
Right.
But where does this end up going? And I think the most interesting idea is something mentioned in this article that we're going to discuss here in a second, is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So Aldous Huxley does this like dystopian view of the future. This book, by the way, is now like 125 years old. I think it was written in the early 1900s,
no,
late
it's
1800s.
Not.
Okay. We got to verify this.
Look it up.
Important point. Okay. You're right. It's 90 years old. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is like 90 years old. I'm going to do spoiler alert, blah, blah, blah. But this is an important point. What ends up happening in the Brave New World is people are living a very unnatural life. Like transhumanism has already happened. Right? Like sexuality has been completely divorced from reproduction. People are being born in test tubes. People are being genetically engineered into classes. So it's kind of a eugenics thing also. So like you have like a worker class that doesn't think, and then you have all the way up to like your highest class, right? But in this world, they have reservations for the people who live natural lives. Right. And if the Catholic Church protests against all of this, you have to wonder if we're going to end up on the reservation.
On the reservation. Yeah.
So like the thrust of Brave New World is someone comes out of a reservation who's kind of half from the New World and half from the reservation. Like his father's from the New World and I think his mother's from the reservation. I'm not sure. And so he kind of has this like soulful intuition of someone who's lived naturally. And he's trying to make it make sense in the Brave New World. Right. And that's kind of where the tension is, you know?
Yeah.
But like, are we as Catholics going to end up, you know, who's on a reservation right now?
Who? I don't know. You guys.
Mennonites.
Mennonites.
Like
yeah.
they're almost exactly like the Brave New World stuff. Like they're now so far out of touch with modern society that people literally go on vacation there to see them.
Yeah.
You know, and to see and try to get insights from what they might understand that we don't because they're living a simpler life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could be that, like, depending on how the Catholic Church interacts and how Catholics interact with all this transhumanism stuff, do we end up on a reservation if we reject it all?
I mean, I think there's been like a back to the land movement, you know, since we left the land.
Right.
But
people, by the way, need to understand that. Like, my wife's grandparents on both sides were part of a back to the land movement like 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like this idea that the new generation wants to go buy a little bit of property and homestead has been going on for 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Do not think that that's a fad.
Yeah. But I think there's something interesting in it. And I see like a lot of Catholics, a lot of Christians are some of the people that are attracted to this kind of idea. And I think there's something interesting that maybe, and this would be like kind of like a Wendell Berry idea, is like people think that we've sort of lost something of like what it means to be human, you know, and like work and toil and see the cycles of life and death, you know, naturally. And so I think there's like a lot of appeal in going back to the land, but it doesn't actually right now make sense for most Catholic families to do that, you know, and if it did, it would be this going to the reservation. But yeah, I find like a tension there. Like we're not all called to go be farmers, you know. But
right. I don't know. Like I was listening to a guy who I really admire who was still trying to get a date for the podcast. And he was kind of arguing something to the effect of we'd all be going homesteading if we could afford it. And I'm like, I don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm kind of an urban person and I don't mind it, you know?
No, Ryan has
no desire.
No, no, he's
will,
like, I'm a city boy. I
will butcher an animal to save money or to feed my family. I will not do it for fun.
Yeah.
You know? All right. Well, let's kind of go. So part of what brought this conversation up is Laura found an interesting article. Let me get the name of it correctly. The article is "The Gay Rights Movement Has Been Hijacked by a Radical Transhumanist Agenda."
By Jennifer Bilek. I'm sorry. I don't know how
right.
to say
And it's on the Substack Reality's Last Stand, which Laura is the dissident who reads this, not me. All right. So anyway, let me summarize this person's argument, which I think is pretty good. It's basically that the more you take gender out of the natural and make it artificial, and the more you allow this body altering stuff to happen, you're kind of just making a person less biological in a sense, right? And you're also allowing IVF, therefore you're taking reproduction out of the person. And like we said before, bad ideas sometimes win. And there's an industry growing up around this.
Yeah, and like with the transgender surgeries and stuff, that we're creating a bunch of infertile people right now.
We're also creating people who are medically dependent for life on that industry.
Yeah.
You know, who are consumers for life from that industry.
Yeah.
And we're also creating a movement that cannot self-reproduce.
Right.
It needs to convert.
Yeah.
Or to do test tube babies or something to reproduce. It can't reproduce itself. Therefore, it's going to be kind of like an aggressive, or it's going to need to, I don't know if tax is the right word, but it's going to need to be like always converting people over to its viewpoint. It needs to spread itself, right?
Yeah.
So the problem is there's all these motives for this idea to spread.
Yeah.
Including just straight up financial motives.
Right.
Right.
I remember 14, 15 years ago picking up a book at Conception Abbey that was like, it was just in the library. It was like answers for these different problems of the world, you know. And then it was like the overpopulation chapter was very short. And it was like, don't worry about these people because they'll just kill themselves off and we won't have that idea anymore. I don't think that's...
No, that's interesting because you hear a lot of people make these demographic arguments, but it's like overpopulation has been kind of defeated as an idea since about 1980.
People still push it, though.
I know, that's the point.
Yeah.
It's like it's 40 years it's been defeated. Meaning like Ehrlich's population bomb book, I think, is a book from the 70s. And there were some economists who kind of showed that it's just not happening.
Yeah.
And now 40 years later, the idea hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
So the idea has a virality to it, even though evidence stacks up against it.
Yeah.
You know, even Elon Musk is like, we're not breeding enough. This is going to be called the Elon Musk podcast.
Yeah, right. I know Elon Musk to say that, right. It's interesting that the thing shows itself to be false, but there's still people, right. It's just the same thing. There's people still advancing that idea. And I think I have this thing with like some of the gender stuff, the weirder it gets, the more I'm like, well, this is going to implode, right? Because it's just like, obviously nonsense, you know,
Right.
and we're saying that sometimes something showing itself to be nonsense does not rule the day, you know?
Meaning like something showing itself to be nonsense doesn't always go away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
And right. So
I do think this progressivism stuff is coming to an end, but it will, of course, keep surviving as like a fringe idea. Kind of like in the way, like, I think communism's been tried so many times and failed so many times with such a body count.
Well, right now we're saying, though, that there's an industry built around it that is protecting it because
Right.
of its industry and interests. Right. Yeah.
As soon as they have an industrial complex, it's trouble, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this transhumanist agenda one more way. The article, if I don't think it actually said this, but it's the type of thing you jump to the conclusion. It's almost like there's an elite conspiracy of billionaires funding the transhumanist movement.
I mean, it kind of did say that, but
it kind of did, but it kind of didn't. It kind of gave evidence for like people who are building companies to profit off of it, you know, which is exactly the problem, right? But I think that my view of kind of the way elites work these days is that elites are surfing more than they are controlling.
Yeah.
Right? They're making bets on the future and they're hoping to stay in power. They're hoping to stay rich. And I think a lot of them who end up like predicting what happens or betting right look like conspirators ex post facto.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like if we've got 10 different possibilities the world could go, some elites might line up on all 10 different directions.
Yeah.
One of them will actually be the direction, and those elites will look like they conspired to create it.
Yeah.
But really, they just bet on it. I think that a president, a politician, FDR type or whatever, they're all surfing the wave and trying to stay on top of the wave more than controlling the ocean. And I think that's important as like an outlook on the world.
Yeah. So it sounds kind of like you're saying that it's like they're opportunists. They're people that are good at seeing an opportunity.
Well, like the first rule of power is like stay in power.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, the first rule of wealth is like stay wealthy, you know?
Yeah.
So I think they're being motivated by those two ideas, you know, like how do we stay in control to what little control we have? And then they're just kind of making bets to make that happen.
Yeah.
You know, like if you just look at like all the academic research we have on sociology, on political science, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, no one has ever been bright enough to say, here's how you control humanity.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no like book on this, right? So I don't think there's 12 people in a room who know, hey, we know how to create social movements and engineer all the world events so that this happens. I think more or less they're betting on the world events, and some of them bet right, and then ex post they look right. I would even say this is true by philosophers.
Yeah, like they're kind of anticipating what's about to, or reading what is coming before everybody else, maybe.
Or they're not, or they just look like that ex post, meaning like when society becomes more postmodern, then we go find the writers of the previous century that were talking that way, and they become the great influences. Yeah. Not that they caused it, but that they become ex post important because they aligned with the way society went.
Yeah.
I'm about 50-50 on this, but I think this is in general, I just think this simple idea that there's a group of people with a transhumanist agenda who are engineering everything in society and our politics doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Can I bring up another interesting aspect of this article?
Yes.
The title is how it, you know, the gay rights movement has been hijacked by radical transhumanist people. So maybe the in or the opportunity there or whatever is the article brings up like they've been able to sort of capitalize and will further capitalize on talking about rights.
Right.
like rights of these different groups. Well, rights of these people that look a little bit different. Well, what about the rights of these people? And now it's like really hard to say this group of people doesn't have rights, you know?
Yeah, I like what you're saying about this use of rights to confuse things. It's part of this disingenuous talk idea. There's a Catholic who's very significant academic named Mary Ann Glendon, who wrote a book a long time ago, like in the 90s, called Rights Talk. And it kind of is exploring this idea about how by invoking rights, you actually confuse the subject as opposed to make progress. Yeah. And I think we've gotten way beyond where we were in the 90s on that, you know? Now there's rights for all types of things that just confuse all types of subjects.
Yeah.
All right. Well, depending on how offensive this next section is, this could be the end of the podcast. All right. We're going to come back with another episode of How to Live Simply. I got 3 ideas where you got to come with at least 2.
We'll come. Yeah.
All right. So look forward to that. We also got a guy coming to talk about the 12-step programs and how they spiritually approach addiction. Yeah. But I have 8% battery life. And if you are still here, let's talk about how to troll your wife. All right. Probably we should address why you troll your wife. I don't know, but it makes your life more interesting. Makes your relationship more interesting. It adds spice. Okay, so your wife comes home and says, hey, I met somebody today, an interesting person, or made a new friend or something like this. And you say, or I have a meeting next week with someone. And then you say, and they say, you know, Miss Smith or Sarah or Jessica or something like this, right? And you go, Jessica? What's the last name? Or you go, Miss Smith? What's the first name? And you look concerned, all right? And then they tell you the first name, and you say, oh, no. I used to date that person.
Oh, my gosh, Clark.
And then your wife goes, no, you didn't. You go, yeah, I did. And they've been trying to get in contact with me all this time. This is kind of sketch. And then basically, no matter who your wife is going to go meet, you just do this over and over and over again. You just claim you've dated every single friend she's ever made. All right. Now I have this other idea. This other idea works when you're with another couple that's hopefully got a sense of humor. So you're with the other couple and you turn to the husband in the middle of everybody and say, isn't it rough when your wife's a feminist?
Yeah.
And then the wives, if they argue with you about being a feminist, they're kind of proving they're a feminist by being so disagreeable about everything. And then you say, I know what it's like, man. All right. But what's great is you can also do the reverse. You say, isn't it wonderful being married to a traditional woman?
I think your wife would object to both.
I know. That's what's so great. And you get the right friend who totally is horrified by both too. And then they start yelling at you about they're not, what's that mean? Because they don't quite know how to both accept the good and turn away the bad. So then you just put your hand up like, don't talk now. Now for the wives out there, we've got 2 responses. Laura and her husband, Ryan, have each perfected their own perfect response to trolls. And they've done this, I think, by hanging out with me for too many years. So Laura's perfect response is when you're trolling, she pretends she did not hear anything you said and just continues the previous conversation.
Yeah.
Like she just as an audience, refuses to acknowledge that something just happened that was objectionable.
And I just feel bad. I feel bad for the troll. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And the more you can project that you feel bad for the person who just said something so dumb, you're basically forcing the person to bomb. Part of this advice is for these men who wish they were stand-up comedians, but aren't and will never be. This is your audience. It's your wife, right? All right. And then the other thing Ryan does is if you ever tease Ryan about anything, he'll just kind of look at you with big puppy dog eyes, almost like there's a tear in them. He'll be like, I think you're right. And then he walks out of the room and it's horrifying. I remember when he invented this. It was like I was able to get his goat, and then one day we're sitting in a car and I say something and he said, I think you're right, and walked out of the car, and I had to chase him down to apologize. And he was playing me. He was playing me the whole time. It's still painful. Ugh. Okay. Now you're armed.
Okay.
Be brave in your marriage.
Yeah.
All right. See you later, Laura. See you next week.
Bye, Clark.
All right. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.